Okay, we're going to get started with the next session. I do want to remind you that during lunch to visit the vendor booths in the Sunburst Lounge. Also, I want to let you know that we are recording, which means this could be put on the YouTube with captions, so you're aware. This is collaborative feedback tools for empowering student growth and class presentations. This presentation was designed with Martin Law, who is not here today, but we do have with us at the end Dr. Amanda Lilly, and along with Dr. Law, she is the co-director of the Communications Lab here at Utah State and an assistant professor in Communication Studies. And then we have Aubry Barnes and Nathan Spencer, who are both graduate instructors in Communication Studies.
Thanks. Did you want to? Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here today. Is this working? Like, can we? Is it like, or is it just for Zoom that we're using it?
We're going to pretend it's for Zoom, and if it doesn't work.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thank you guys all for being here today. Me and Nate and I, we started teaching public speaking last year, starting in our graduate program. We're both second years coming into this fall semester. And we taught at the same time every day. And on our way to the classes that we taught, we began talking pretty frequently about how our classes were going, how we felt like we were connecting with students, and if we were doing things right, because it was our first time, and we were really uncertain about a lot of things. But kind of as we were talking, we noticed that, speech one went through in public speaking, and we had all of the kids give their speeches, rewatched them, and then spent hours writing paragraphs for them of feedback, telling them the things that we noticed, the things that we thought were effective, and the things that we thought they could work on. And it went as every semester kind of continued to go. It was just, the kids may or may not have read the feedback, and the next speech comes along, and we're trying to meet with each student and meet them where they're at, whether they're, having anxiety about talking or they're really trying to work on their persuasive skills. And I started noticing myself feeling a little burnt out, as I think a lot of us have felt, and lacking a lot of connection with my students. And there was this very pinnacle moment after speech 2 for me that I did the same 10, 15 hours working on grading and giving them their feedback, and I got a reflection back from a student where she shared that her confidence was a little bit shattered. She was not sure how she missed her stasis when she knew she had it on her note cards, and was gonna, suck it up and keep trying and try not to let it shake her too much for her third speech, but she was gonna try even harder, even though she didn't quite understand why she didn't get the grade that she wanted. And for me, I felt like that was a moment where I thought, wow, I'm losing them. I'm doing the exact opposite of what I want to be doing. I'm wanting to give them confidence and I'm wanting them to connect with what I'm saying, but it didn't feel like that was happening.
Yeah. Just to reflect a few of Aubry's thoughts and add on a couple of my own. Our first year of our program, Aubry and I took a lot of walks, walking back and forth from our classrooms to our next classrooms, back to our offices. And this was probably the most common thing that came up for us when we were expressing what was hard for us in teaching. As brand new teachers who have done a little bit of work in our undergrad but really didn't have a ton of experience, we found ourselves wanting to find a more useful way to interact with our students in a more connecting and engaging manner. I think to the pinnacle of my frustration was when I was sitting at home in my cinder block wall apartment, in my office, and like Aubry mentioned, on hour 3, 4, 6, 10 of writing feedback on Canvas that students would probably never read or honestly not have the bandwidth to read 4 or 5 paragraphs of feedback about their speech. I wanted to find a way that was more useful. And so that's when Aubry and I started talking about potentially shifting our feedback from Canvas to grading the speeches in person with the student and giving feedback.
Sorry, we're going to have to get used to trading this microphone back and forth. So I wasn't involved in public speaking last year when Nate and Aubry started working on this, but Nate and Aubry are both my grad students too. I'm Nate's advisor, so I was talking to them about this in my previous experience with public speaking. So I used to be an assistant course director for a very large Midwestern university and do all the public speaking stuff. And I noticed when I was a grad student and had 75 students a semester, and I was grading speeches and trying to do grad student-y stuff, that it was pretty miserable. So I had actually started working on something very similar years kind of ahead without even knowing what they were working on, and I wish I could have talked to you about it then. And so another part of it too that we wanted to touch on and kind of really embrace is students don't want to just read paragraphs that criticize them. They're not going to do it. How many of you have ever waited a little bit before you read your student evals because you were like, nah, can't handle that today, right? So we wanted to make sure the students were getting the feedback in a way that was student-centered. And we also prioritize a growth style model here at USU with our public speaking. And so it's not necessarily speaking for perfection. It's speaking to embody their own voice and figure out what strengths they want to work on. And that way we're taking a much more inclusive kind of approach to public speaking. And so with this too, we could get feedback that focused on the students and what they were trying to grow, and not necessarily every single thing on the rubric. So when they came up to me and told me this idea and they'd already been working on it, I was like, well, let me add in a couple little things. let me give you some of my experience too.
Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah.
So we identified some of our main problems. We felt like writing up all this feedback felt ineffective. It didn't feel authentic to experience. Rewatching speeches over and over again is not how people typically experience speeches, is not the impressions that we're left with. It was very time consuming, 10, 15 hours for speeches a semester, ranging from 4 to 12 minutes, also during our own finals. Became very exhausting very quickly, and oftentimes that grading would be pushed to the end, meaning that we're not even able to give real feedback if we're not even able to remember the speeches. And it lacked a lot of connection, where we weren't connecting with students, we weren't meeting them where they were at because we didn't know where they were at. They weren't part of the conversation at all. They were just showing up and praying that we gave them an A. So we came up with some objectives. If you want to talk, Mike.
Yeah. We wanted to, as I mentioned before, we wanted to explore the benefits of immediate negotiated feedback for critical thinking and student empowerment. So what this means is we wanted to take some of those power dynamics that we often experience as students with our professors and level those down where we can negotiate a grade with the student while also bringing in our expertise as instructors to offer them the feedback they need to become more experienced and better professional speakers. And along with that, we'll talk about this more later, but we developed some guidelines for approaching these conversations with students so that we as instructors feel safe along with that, and also so that students can feel safe to be able to more freely talk with us about their concerns, about their goals, about their areas that they wanted to improve in. Along with that, we wanted to be able to apply strategies, like Aubry mentioned, to reduce out-of-class grading time and enhance student engagement through in-person assessment. We were talking with Dr. Lilly, and she mentioned that at her university, the classes were up to 25 people and one instructor in charge of that.
There's 60 sessions? 70.
And 70 sessions. It just isn't realistic for one person to be able to give quality, thorough feedback to 25 plus students, sometimes even having multiple sections. And we wanted to demonstrate an approach to assessment that's directed both by students' learning goals and instructors' objectives for the course. So like I was mentioning, we wanted to get the student's voice out there into these conversations while also being able to come in with our expertise as instructors and offer them skills and advice and guidelines in which they can progress as students. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that kind of encompasses it. So what does this look in practice? What we ended up coming up with, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
As Nate and I kind of workshopped this our first semester, we started doing it in the middle of the semester. We came into our classes and we're like, hey, we're going to shake things up a little bit. We're going to come in for speech day, and you guys we're going to have really short in-between times. You know, one person speaks, the next person up and ready to go. And we're going to take the last 20 minutes of class to grade the 4 speakers one-on-one, not in front of their peers. And Nate and I had a lot of values going into these conversations. We wanted to make sure that students felt safe. We wanted to make sure we felt safe giving grades. But most of all, we wanted to decenter grades and recenter feedback for students. Because a student sees a C, who knows if they're going to engage with that? If they're going to see the feedback and think, oh, that was worth a C, or if they're just going to say, wow, they didn't get what I was trying to say. Maybe it was personal. And something that's so difficult about presentations and public speaking is that no matter how objective you try to make it, there's still so much subjectivity to it. And so we wanted to meet the students and acknowledge that subjectivity, own our own experiences as audience members. You know, maybe sometimes I get distracted because forget how to spell a word while I'm writing on their rubric. And then I miss their thesis, and then I miss it, and they get points lost because of something I did. But this felt a lot more authentic of an experience to say, you know what, we're people too, and I'll tell you how I felt during your speech, and that's what I can give you. I can't tell you if it was, you know, going to change the masses because I'm only one person, and who knows how everybody else might have experienced it, but I can tell you what I noticed and the tools that I have that could help you out. So these are a general idea. We really encouraged other UTFs and TAs to take this with a grain of salt and follow a script that felt comfortable for them. But in theory, you're greeting the student when they come in, congratulating them, they finished, asking them what their goals are so they can immediately see this is what we're focusing on. We're focusing on what you wanted to work on. And then ask the student how they felt about it. I think asking them how they felt going up there, they typically say, oh, I was really nervous, or I don't really know how that felt, or they're like, I think I did good. And then you get to ask them why, and it starts this really beautiful conversation with them where they're hopefully, potentially, talking back with you and sharing what they wanted to work on during their speeches. And then I kind of want to give it off to Nate, because this next part is when you have to give the feedback, which can be really intimidating as a professor, especially in person, especially when a speech maybe not have gone very well.
Yeah. Just a couple things I want to mention too before we get to feedback is Dr. Lilly mentioned we follow a growth model here at USU. If you pay attention to these 7 points on this, pretty much all of them are focused on the student's growth rather than meeting some arbitrary bar of perfection that, let's face it, there really isn't one, that everybody just kind of establishes one. We live in the reality where we do have to assign a grade. We do have to evaluate them and give them that, so that is there. But everything else here focuses on growth, especially step number 4, where we get to share with them clean feedback. This is also kind of can be known as constructive criticism, but I like the phrase clean feedback more because it's clean without our judgment or our values mucking up their process of learning. So how this goes is we would start by identifying something concrete and specific that we noticed. Bill, I noticed that when you gave your speech, you paused halfway and didn't say anything for about 4 seconds. There's nothing in here that is like my evaluation or my how I'm interpreting it or how I'm understanding it. It's something concrete that we noticed that they did. And next, we mentioned the impact that that had on us. Bill, when you paused, what it felt like to me is that you forgot what you were saying. And so you may have been taking some time to try and remember what you were saying. And then after we mention how it impacted us, we get to take ownership as a single person of what that behavior did for us during the speech. We get to offer some insight. We get to bring in our expertise as public speaking instructors and tell them maybe some strategies. We can ask them how they felt about it. And incorporating that growth mindset where there's not an arbitrary standard for perfection, but rather we get to hear from the experiences of the student and share with them some tips and strategies that will help them become the most empowered speaker they can become. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Sometimes it can be really hard. Sometimes this is an intimidating conversation, and when we were teaching other TAs, we had a lot of discussion about how am I supposed to remember everything that the student said up there? Or, what if I tell them that I missed their thesis, but they said it and I'm not evaluating? And this is that ownership part of getting to say, well, this is what I noticed, good or bad, this neutral, and how it impacted me, really helps ease some of those tensions with the students I've noticed. And it takes away a lot of ego as you're not saying you did this and it was bad, or using morality to say whether what they did was effective or not, but just talking to them through how I experienced their speech. Hey, I noticed that I really got I really know what side you were on. And I really know that you're really against you're trying to persuade us to the other side, but I could tell that you really hated this other side. You kept using language like, they suck, they're stupid. And that impacted me because I felt like I wasn't sure if you understood where that other side was coming from. And so this is
those are real experiences, by the way, that we've had.
Yeah. And so I think, this part of it can be a really tricky part, but it also just takes some time. I think we're still learning, and getting back into the groove of getting feedback.
So one thing I do want to acknowledge with this too is there are obviously some people who will get less pushback from students than others. So not to be a downer, but that's usually just what I do, my research and everything else, is look at the terrible things that happen. So I've noticed in my experience of using this that sometimes I will get a student who will push back on me and be like, well, you're wrong. And I'm like, okay, all right. Explain to me why you think I'm wrong. And give them an opportunity where you don't escalate the situation, where you keep very level and kind of stoic. And while we're doing this, we do have rubrics, and we are filling the rubrics out while we watch the presentations. And so if they do push back and be like, well, I did say that thesis statement. I'm like, okay, explain to me again. Tell me how you feel about it. Tell me how you experienced it. And if they do it, like, okay, well, I'm looking at my rubric, and I see that here you had said this, and then here you said that, and that's not quite the formula for the thesis statement we were looking for this particular presentation. So let's negotiate this. And so therefore, you're kind of coming through with objective, like, although presentational speaking is highly subjective, you still have some objective stuff you can fall back on to kind of give them that hard numerical data that can kind of sometimes stop the pushback. Also, luckily, in the way that our class is shaped here at USU, the graduate students, the UTFs and the TAs give the feedback. And so they also had me as a backup. And so if they had a student who kept pushing back, they could fall back to me too. So there is sometimes when you're using this, you have to build in those kind of structures and anticipate student feedback. Luckily here at USU, it seems to be mostly okay. I've not gotten a whole lot of pushback. And so we have built in those safety structures because, as these two will tell you, I do not tolerate my graduate students or my UTFs or TAs being talked to in a way that I don't find appropriate. And I have heard from students that I'm pretty intimidating, so it does help to have me as backup now. So just, I do want to hesitate and kind of give you that kind of caveat to this. That is usually a great experience. It's very rewarding. Thinking about student retention with all the stuff coming up here at USU, there's a way to build connection, keep the students coming back, give them a sense of community. But sometimes if a student didn't do well, you're going to have to tell them face to face they didn't do well, and they may not take it as well as you would like them to. And so kind of have like layers behind you when you're giving this feedback that you can use to help protect yourself.
Just to add one more thing to that, I don't think anybody likes being told they didn't do well. I think that's a universally painful experience. as someone who's going through thesis edits, and Amanda is kind, and she's compassionate, and I'm still like, whew. But anyway, one great opportunity this presents is real-world application for students as well. They're going to go into the world, and they're going to be criticized a lot more harshly than we do within the confines of the university. And so we get to sit with them through that discomfort and say, yes, this speech didn't go well, but that's okay. It's not a reflection of you. It's a reflection that you are trying and you are growing. And I have found those to be some of the most fulfilling moments for me when a student hasn't done well and I get to sit with them in that and build that connection as an instructor with them.
Really fast, let's just chat that constructing a grade portion of the slide prior, so sorry. Just this very last, like the constructing a grade and checking in. So asking them how they make sense of the feedback. You know, you let them know and then they get a chance to say, hey, I don't think that that happened. You need to chat with them. You have the opportunity to say, oh, if you videoed it, then by all means, like you can rewatch the video and if you can show me where you said it, I can be sure to give you those points. But again, if it starts turning that way, it's a lot of this conversation is, okay, like, let's not focus on the grade. Let's focus on how, like, why did I miss it then, if you said it? Maybe your points weren't being super clear or wasn't connected very well. So it can move away from, okay, well, you really want those points. I super get it. Why don't we talk about why I didn't hear it? Maybe it was something that I did. Or maybe throughout your speech, things were a little disorganized, and that's maybe why I missed it. And then this constructing a grade portion is also very subjective to the individual. A lot of the TAs decided to go in many different routes, whether they wanted to focus more on giving a grade first and saying, okay, based on our conversation, the goals that you had and the objectives that you met, this is the grade that I probably would give you. How do you feel about it? I often asked my students first, okay, based on the goals that you met and the objectives, what grade do you think you should get? I think, you know, this is up to each individual what they feel more comfortable with and how their classroom dynamics work, and I think either's completely fine. Nate and I differ in this one as well. But that constructing a grade portion is also going to be different teacher to teacher, professor to professor. And then, yeah, at the end, you're just asking, checking in, saying, if you need any other feedback, feel free to meet me in my office hours. And these are around 5 minutes, so you can get through all the students. They're not very long, but they ended up feeling really connecting, I think. So now we can go on. I think results feels good. Thanks, Amanda. I noticed once I started doing this that my students' reflections became a lot more specific. They were noting what I said more and saying, you know, my professor said this, and I realized that I wanted to do this better. Or they started realizing that the goals they were setting were too high, because when I brought them up in the conversations, they were like, oh, you know, I really wanted to try like using a chair and sitting down in the middle of the class, but I ended up really just trying to focus on not throwing up while I was up there. And it was a great chance to like say, oh, okay, great. So we're working on breathing. We're working on our pre-speech anxiety, and we can meet there. And so I feel like their reflections became a lot more specific. They had a lot more awareness of what their needs were. And I felt like I got a lot more engagement during class conversations because I started creating a relationship with my students.
Yeah, I reflect on everything Aubry said. One thing that I noticed that I think is also important to pay attention to is, this is my experience, so take this with a grain of salt, but I'm a very verbose person. When I start, I really care about public speaking. And so when I go into those conversations with my students, it was important for me to monitor myself to make sure that I didn't dominate the conversation of giving them all of this feedback. Because if you think about the limits of human beings as well, they probably only have the capacity to process 2 or 3 main key points to improve for their speech. And when we're also thinking about students, undergraduates who are taking 12 to 18 credits a semester and have a very full workload, I would imagine it's probably hard for them to take all of the feedback that they're given, and be like, okay, I'm going to apply it and do that. And so it was important for me to identify 2 to 3 main key points that they could work on to improve their speech. And that is why we set that 5-minute time limit, so that the conversation wouldn't be overbearing, that it would be productive and insightful, and also manageable for us as well.
15-minute convos would not be the most time-saving. Yeah, and then as times went on, I feel like Nate and I navigated some difficult conversations, had to tackle my own ego at times. If a student came in and was like, I want a 98, I was like, oh, you called snowboarders stupid. What do you mean? So there was some wrestling with my ego and wrestling with some kids' egos and figuring out how do we focus on, helping the students meet the goals that they want and become better speakers if that's what they're going to do, if that's why they're here. Yeah, and as we got through our fall semester and it felt really great, and we chatted with Martin and Dr. Lilly and decided to start teaching the rest of the TAs and the UTFs for the public speaking program here. How to do this, made a couple of fun videos that we got to display our acting skills on, and did it all spring semester. And it's something that I think has become really effective for teachers as they're grading these speeches. If students have been connecting more, I think I've been feeling less burnout. I've been able to engage with the students with more of a pep in my step, I would say. And at the end, I feel like the community within my classrooms became a lot closer because there was an understanding that I was going to meet them with my humanity, and hey, sometimes I'm going to get distracted when someone walks in the middle of your speech and I'm going to miss something. But then they also became a lot more accepting of learning and changing things that they might have previously felt about public speaking. So I think this is the conclusion. As we were putting stuff together, we found that other people were doing a lot of similar things with immediate feedback, and obviously negotiating grades isn't a new novel concept. But these are some people who have supported some of the ideas that we've brought in and feel like makes it a really effective and credible form of grading presentations. Anything else to add, Nate?
You got it. That's awesome.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Well, in the spirit of collaborative feedback, we'd love any of your questions or ideas or comments. And we're ready for any of them that contradict what we're talking about. If you're like, this does not sound like it would work, by all means. Oh, thank you.
I'm just thinking of application, not listening to speeches, but reading presentations and different things like that. And can you explain the structure? Are they coming in one at a time to give their speeches?
Yes.
Or are they coming in groups? And then you're doing this part by themselves. I'm thinking of audience members and how to get feedback from peers as well, or if that was part of what you talked about or not.
Yes.
Or how you did it.
Yes, that's a great question. So you're asking like what the process is as we're grading speeches, if there's an audience, and if they're also getting peer feedback as well as our own. Yes, so how the speech days would be set up is we have our 50-minute blocks, 45-minute blocks, and around the first 25 to 30 minutes would be everybody there, mandatory attendance, and the 3 to 5 students giving their speeches back to back in front of the whole class. Then the last remaining 20 minutes, anybody who didn't give a speech is welcome to leave, go to do whatever, and those 3 to 5 students go out in the hallway and we call them in one by one and spend 4 or 5 minutes with them. It wasn't as implemented, but we were working on getting peer feedback papers as well. So they would always have 2 peers also giving them feedback during their speeches that their peers would give them after their speech. Yes, that was how it was when I was taking public speaking, and there was a couple of classes that were also focusing more on the peer feedback. Yeah.
To also answer that other part of your question, I find this to be very potentially valuable outside of a public speaking setting as well. I would imagine that this would be a great opportunity if classes are giving group presentations, that we could invite the group in as a whole. And it would require some additional like facilitation skills from the instructor as well, because you're dealing with multiple opinions, multiple personalities, and a wider audience. But it could be a great opportunity to evaluate presentations and make them very applicable for students, you know, where they're getting some real-time feedback on how they did, rather than a stressed out instructor going in on Canvas and doing it in that other way as well.
So something we're going to work towards here too. I just took over the public speaking here at USU last month, so it's getting completely revamped. So, but one thing I've done before is I had a business-focused class that was a presentational speaking class, and so I had them put together like a sales pitch, and then I actually invited community members who are business owners to come in and watch and pretend that they were like investors, and I called it like our class's Shark Tank, and so the community members were the investors and things like that. And so I did it there where someone who wasn't me, who was actually out in the world, would give them real feedback that was very applicable, because most of these students want to be entrepreneurs, right? And so I think having things like that can make the class much more engaging and much more practically applicable. Also, I have used peer feedback. I usually don't have the peers meet and do it face-to-face, because again, I always look at the really terrible nihilistic kind of point of view. I'm worried that like if I had a student who was giving negative feedback to another student, it could cause conflict, right? And so I would have them write down their immediate feedback as a student was presenting, and I would also have it be anonymous. And so students didn't know who their peer was that was giving them feedback, and they would turn the slips of paper into me, and then I would give it to the student the next class period, or I would upload it to Canvas. And then that way they did get peer feedback, because peer feedback can be very different than instructor feedback, but it was in a safe way, at least in my thoughts. Yeah.
You talked about the cognitive load of getting feedback in a conversation that you might walk away with 2 or 3 takeaways, if that. Do they walk away with anything physical that they can help them reflect later, help them remember what happened in the conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Go ahead.
This, as it is fairly new, we're like kind of workshopping. I found myself, I'm a very visual person, and I also really valued them having, you know, key takeaways of like what we brought up and the good stuff that they did and the stuff that they wanted to work on. And so I ended up writing like little tiny half sheets where I do bullet points of throughout our conversation of, okay, you want to work on pacing. Something that went well today was your vocal changes. And I really noticed that you moved from side to side to your points. You really want to work on having invitational rhetoric, or you're actually at a point where you're trying to incorporate emotion into this. So you're trying to be vulnerable up there. And so I'd make some of those points, and I think quite a few other TAs as well would. I'd also end up putting their grade on there if we had come to a conclusion on their grade. So then they just knew right then and there, they had a copy of it, and I'd have something else where I wrote these same things down.
Yeah, I agree with Aubry. Also, just to offer like something else in terms of the other side of the coin, occasionally my students would ask me for the rubric that I was filling out in the middle of the speech. And sometimes I was slightly hesitant to do that because this is from my perspective, when it's game time and I'm like in the trenches writing stuff down, I don't always write it in the nicest way, you know what I'm saying? Like I'll write like bad conclusion or, like something like that. And so I give them that, I'm always happy to like offer them the feedback form because I think there's really valuable information on there. But I do offer the caveat of like, I processed all of this information in a clean way, much like the clean feedback suggests. I processed this in a clean way and I'm happy or I offered it to you during this conversation. I'm happy to give you the feedback form, but just know that it's just very like scribbles that are on there that might not come across as the nicest way.
Yeah. So I'm a huge nerd, and I'm really dorky. And so one of the things we were going to implement this fall with the growth model and all that kind of stuff in public speaking, I was also a preschool teacher, and sometimes that comes out in my university teaching, is one of the first activities my students are going to do for public speaking this semester is they're going to get this picture of a tree, and it's going to have 3 branches, and they're going to write on the 3 branches what their goals are for the semester. And so then I'm going to give all of my UTFs and TAs these sheets of paper in the shape of a leaf. And so they can write down good positive feedback and other things they need to work on that then the students can glue onto their tree for the semester and have this cumulative thing of how they can see like they're growing. Because again, I am a nerd and preschool oriented sometimes. But I like that too, because like oftentimes if you hand a college student something and they're running to class, they're going to shove it in their backpack and it's going to be crumpled. And then like 2 weeks later, they'll look at it and be like, ah, what is this? And spit their gum into it and throw it away. And so I think even embedding, getting the feedback in a way where they're making something with it that will like be a positive thing they can look back on for like throughout the entire semester will get them to maybe hold it a little bit more dear and not just shove it in a pocket and spit their trident into it later.
I know that it's not a one-to-one scale up, but what are some best practices you think could be applied?
I had an idea, but I don't know how. I'm fairly new into academia, but my first thought is bringing in, on speech days, having multiple UTFs in, and so then you're able to split off and then do 8 students a day, having that focused feedback. There's also the opportunity, Martin has brought up a full day of speeches and then 2 days later doing it, where it still feels pretty fresh and you're doing these in-person ones, but maybe you're getting a lot more done. Maybe that could be more time effective. But it seems like Amanda has.
So 2 ideas I have is actually the Canvas record a video button. And so you could record a video of some feedback. They still get, it's not a conversation right then, but you can invite them to a conversation. They can even record a video to submit about what kind of things they're looking for you to think about during their presentation. You could watch that after their presentation, use those kind of video features in Canvas, which research has shown is much more effective than just writing stuff and using the rubrics. Another thing we are doing too is having them record it, and then the new Comm Lab, which will be soft launching this semester, we're actually have attendance there. So if the students in the class can't, or my UTFs and TAs can't do it in the class, the students are going to record their presentations and then go watch it with a Comm Lab attendant. And so that way they can still get that feedback, and then the attendant can also meet with their instructor and like maybe do group things. So it's kind of like spreading that division of labor. The only problem with spreading the division of labor and having more UTFs and more TAs is you have to pay people, and the universities right now not necessarily super excited about that. So it's something to figure out. And the way the public speaking here is structured is we have a large lecture of 225 students and then 15 lab sections that are managed either by a singular graduate teaching assistant or 2 UTFs or undergraduate teaching fellow or TAs, and the sections are only 15 students. So right now that's how we're operating it. It would be very difficult if you were a singular instructor with a large lecture of 225 students to implement this. And that's when I think maybe peer feedback could come into it. But again, then you have like to consider like power dynamics of peers and things like that. So we want to figure this out, and we will spend time thinking on it.
Yeah. So I'm faculty in computer science, and so basically we all stink at public speaking, all faculty.
Do we have a class for you?
So one thing that I think is important for our students to at least get used to it, because it really makes them stick out in their jobs. But we don't have classes where we can devote much time, so when we do presentations, it's like a one-off thing at the end of the semester. So I guess my question is, what type of, do you have a resource that we can give them to help them prepare? And so this is not the technical part of their presentation, but just the speaking part. And then a simple rubric that can help us give meaningful feedback that they're just going to take off and hopefully use at some point in the future, because we won't do a second presentation?
Yes, if you could email me, actually, any of you in the room. Like I said, the communication lab is getting ready to soft launch, and so that's going to be a space where all of USU students can go and meet with a trained graduate teaching assistant, faculty member in communication, and get some guidelines, tips they can practice there to also do the disincitation work with their communication apprehension. And so it's something they can get. It's an outside resource. Also, we would be delighted to come to your class and give like a 15-minute nitty gritty, here's how to present better, find your voice, be more confident. And then I will gladly, if you want to talk about your assignment with me, I'd be glad to make you a rubric that works for you and that the students could take with them afterwards. Yeah, of course. We are all about sharing resources here. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you both so much for this. This has been like, I just feel like you clearly take this really seriously. You're amazing public speakers. I was just listening like, wow, this is the best talk I've heard in a really long time. And you have a lot of skill, and you're putting a lot of thought into how to do this. And I teach two sections of an ecology lab class. It's a communications intensive class. And these are students that they give a poster presentation at the end of this, and I'm trying to convey to students across a broad range of career aspirations that public speaking is just going to benefit you no matter where you go. And I think you give it, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say I wrote a lot of things down, and these 2 points about having communications majors and grad students available to talk with our students is, I think, a resource that I have not tapped into very much, and that I'm very excited to this year. So I'm going to be in touch.
Yes, please do. Like I said, we are soft launching. Martin's not here with us today because he actually left the university to go to a different position. And so now I'm solo leading the comm lab. So just bear with us, have a little patience, but we will get it up and running, and we're very excited about it. And we will have a physical space in Old Main relatively soon. So, and yeah, I'm biased, but I think the grad students in comm studies are pretty stellar.
Thank you. That's okay.
Yeah. And feel free to reach out to us at any time.
I don't want to end on a bad